All right, guys, we just want to welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be looking at our preview and prediction for Notre Dame versus Duke. Ranked contest going down in Durham. 5.5-point line in favor of the Irish. Total set at 51. Primetime ABC, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This one will be played. Look at this Notre Dame offense, Nick. They're coming off a heartbreaking loss to Ohio State with a ground game. They showcased some misdirection in that second half, and it really was able to allow them to get going. Only 50 yards rushing in that first half, about 120 plus in that second half. Aldrich Estime right now leads the nation in rushing yards with 591, 5 touchdowns. Very nice rotation here of backs. You have 3 freshmen backing him up: Jeremiah Love, Jadarian Price, DeBrian Payne. Nice group here. These guys have all been showcasing nice rotation, especially in that game against Ohio State. This is a nice, versatile running game for the Irish that I think certainly showed some muscle in that second half after a disappointing first 30 minutes where they got shut out against the Buckeyes. Nick, all year long, they've been great running the ball. I'll hold back a little bit, though, on being elite. They had 170 against NC State. 80 yards came on one rush by Estime, following, a 3-hour break or whatever for Lightning and whatnot. So the running game's been good. They've not been elite, though, I would say, by any means. And at the end of the day, they did not close the show after a poor first half in South Bend, Nick. So overall, how would you rate this ground game, and how do you feel about them coming into this contest?
I think this is a B+, A- type ground game. I'm very impressed with it so far. Estimine, obviously, like you said, leading the nation, 591 yards on the ground, 7.7 yards per carry, and 5 scores for him. He also has 5 catches for 55 yards, so he has that bit of dual threat ability. Love has had a decent season so far as well. He has 176 yards, 6.8 yards per carry in the score. Payne, he had the touchdown in the Notre Dame game, or the Ohio State game, sorry, and he also has 94 yards on the ground this season. Price is almost 100 yards on the ground and a score as well, 5.2 yards per carry for him. So they have a nice balance here. They're able to spread the ball out and really give it to a bunch of different guys. They're winning the battle of the trenches most weeks. They did struggle at certain points against that interior for Ohio State, but overall, they've been pretty solid in the interior offensive line so far this season, being able to create some nice running lanes for these backs. Estimate is your true number one bell cow here. They kept saying on the broadcast how they had such good balance. They noted at one point in the first half that they had 5 different backs touch the ball, and they kept saying that Estime's your number one guy here, but it doesn't hurt to have 4 guys behind that can really spread the ball out as well. I think Ford is another one that got some touches in there as well. So there are a lot of good balance with this offense on the ground. I really think it's helpful for this team, and it releases some of the pressure on Sam Hartman, who's been known to make mistakes when he puts himself in bad pressure situations.
Yeah, and Hartman, he was really good against Ohio State. Certainly, again, didn't get the job done, but he was completing 68% of his passes, over 70% this season, had 175 and a touchdown, handful of passes that went 20-plus yards downfield. And that's the thing that's really helped this offense. Like last year, I'm going to point the stat out every time we talk about Notre Dame, because last year, 4 plays of 40-plus passing yards. They have 8 of them this year. They didn't have one against the Buckeyes, but they were able to push it downfield with some pace. And this is still a downfield passing attack that is certainly much improved, 5th nationally in 20-plus passing yard plays. So they have certainly upticked tremendously here with Hartman and his guidance. And this isn't even that great of a receiving room, I don't think. Chris Tyree, the converted running back, we figured he'd be good from a yards per catch standpoint. 27 of them, though. That's absurd. 9 recs for 241 yards. He's the leading pass catcher. Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse. Tobias Merriweather's gotten a little bit more involved recently. And Mitchell Evans, he's coming off a phenomenal effort. Finally got the tight ends involved. 7 receptions for him, 70-plus yards. That was impressive to see from the Irish in that game. Even though they lost the game, Nick, this offense still showed adequate balance. We do need to hold back a little bit, though, because, again, they got shut out in that first half, only put up 14 points total. So the Buckeyes did have their number for the most part of that game. But this is still a completely different offense than we've seen in years past. They have very nice balance, and when they're clicking on all cylinders, they can be really dangerous for any opponent.
This is an offense that has nice balance. Hartman, we've been waiting for that shoe to drop with the turnovers. He hasn't had the turnover issue come up yet. You thought that maybe against a good secondary in Ohio State that he might have a turnover issue. No picks so far this season. 14 touchdowns for him, 1,236 yards, 13.2 yards per attempt, as well as 70% completion percentage. So Hartman's been really good. The deep ball has been fantastic. Like you said, that was a huge issue for Notre Dame in the past. Now they have the deep ball threat. They're able to throw over the back and get behind you. Their wide receiving room is not very deep, but they have been able to spread it out and get some people involved. Obviously, we saw the tight ends get involved a little bit more on Saturday, which is something that, is a hallmark for Notre Dame, right? They've been known for their tight ends. They were able to get Mitchell Evans involved. Finally, he's had a slow start to the season. I think he's a big key for this team. Can you get him fully involved in this offense? I like this Notre Dame offense. They've been good this year. They've been better than I expected so far. They put up some nice points. I know they didn't put up a ton of points against Ohio State, but that was just a defensive battle. They could have easily won that game with the way that they played in the second half. That second half offense was fantastic from Notre Dame. They looked composed. They killed a lot of clock, and they made Ohio State go out there and win the game on short field and short situations. I think the offense did their part in the second half. They just got unlucky. The defense couldn't get a stop on fourth down a couple times.
Yeah, I mean, very well said. This offensive line, they were good. Not great, though. Joe Wall, of course, a bookend left tackle, having a phenomenal season. I like Blake Fisher on the other side. He has great size. The interior was a talking point for me going into that Buckeye game. And, they did all right. Occasional pressures were allowed. Run blocking, I think, especially in that second half, was sound. Guys like Pat Coogan, Rocco Spindler, Zeke Correll. This is going to be another tough matchup for him. A 4-2-5 defense that has a pretty good defensive line. But they were getting worn down. Duke was in the Clemson game. We'll talk about their defense here later. But overall, this is a very sound offense, Nick. And like you said, even though only 14 points, this offense isn't exactly built to just put up, 45 in a big-time contest, maybe like a USC or somebody would. The expectation at least would be there for Notre Dame. That's what they want to do, grind it out, destroy clock and win games that way. So we're not going to be that too highly critical. Looking at the Duke offense, we expected Riley Leonard in this group to be really good this season. And Leonard, he's a make or break player for them. If he plays good, they win. If he doesn't, they're going to lose. That's just how this program is built. I like the versatile supporting cast, but we're just going to be out straight up honest, Nick. That's what it's going to come down to. Unlike Notre Dame, Hartman could probably have a bad game, throw a couple picks maybe, and they'll still be in the contest and potentially even still be leading. The running game for Duke has been phenomenal. Jordan Waters, 7 touchdowns, the 15 rushing scores for this football team. That's second nationally. Leonard has 4 and 238 rushing. He certainly is big time of his legs, especially against Duke. A big momentum swing in that one when he was able to break away for a 40, 50-yard touchdown, showcasing some great strength here. This is an offense that certainly has been holding back a little bit, though, I think, Nick. They haven't exactly been teeing off on these awful opponents, only about 37.3 points per game on average this season. They only put up 322 yards against UConn. Northwestern, they almost put up 500, but they didn't really load up the scoreboard by any means. But they've been showcasing nice dynamic balance in this season. Only 74 yards rushing against the Huskies, though, Nick. So what are your thoughts on Duke heading into this one against a really stout defense that has certainly made the stop the run? 37 attempts for Duke, only 89 yards against UConn.
Riley Leonard was not a highly recruited player out of high school from the Mobile, Alabama area. Didn't get a whole lot of looks, a couple programs here and there. Vanderbilt was one that offered him. Ole Miss offered him eventually after he committed to Duke. But he goes to Duke. He's fought. He grinded his way out. He is a true star in the making. His draft stock is certainly rising. Even if he hasn't having the most impressive season passing, but I think it more relies on the running game for this Duke offense. Leonard, 63% completion percentage so far this season, 756 yards, 1 touchdown through the air, no interceptions. Jordan Waters, he's been the big back on the ground, 6.6 yards per carry and 7 scores for him. He also scores as well on 184 yards. Leonard, of course, good with his feet, 238, 8 yards per carry, plus 4 scores for him. It is an issue if this team gets stopped on the ground. Like you said, UConn gave them some fits and they were not able to produce. And they certainly have a poor battle here, in my opinion, on the offensive line compared to Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame has the better defensive line battle against this offensive line for Duke that has looked a little weak at certain situations. They did have some trouble against Clemson at certain points running the ball, which certainly played an issue. Obviously, Riley Leonard broke that huge rushing score that opened that Clemson game up. They have some nice wide receivers, though. Some guys, though, that are still struggling with drops, like Jalen Calhoun, Jordan Moore, and Shamir Higgins. Overall, though, I think this is a good Duke offense. They haven't really blown anyone out yet, in my opinion, in terms of what I expected them to do. I think they're still waiting to hit that full stride, but they are a good unit right now, and they're putting up points, and they're getting drives, and they need to. They're killing clock with their running game. If they can find a good balance and keep the ball on the ground and kill the clock, it will put Notre Dame in tough situations where Hartman's going to have to make decisions.
2.7 yards per attempt, so just an off day for them on the ground. Very flat in that big win. They can't do that again, and I think the best way for them to win this game, they had success running the ball to the edges against Clemson. I think that's something they're going to look to do here because this interior offensive line is not great. Scott Elliott, Jake Hornibrook is one of those guys at right guard. He's not been really that great for him either. Even Graham Barton at left tackle hasn't been the strongest of run blockers. Jacob Monk at guard. This has certainly been a team that's not great on the interior. And we talked about how the rest of this offensive line this season would have to step up. Maurice McIntyre, another one of those veterans who's also had his fair share of struggles at left guard. Pretty solid pass blocking group, I would say. But overall, it's not a team I really want to trust. They were able to hold up, though, against Clemson, though. You got to give it there. The Tigers were not able to get through and force turnovers because Riley Leonard was making good plays. Threw it away a lot. You're probably going to see that here in this game. And like you said with those receivers, the downfield passing attack, they haven't really been that strong themselves. Jalen Calhoun had a terrible game against Clemson. One of the veterans I figured would be a leader in that contest. If, you were to tell me he played as bad as he did and they somehow still won, I wouldn't believe you. Jordan Moore continuing to refine his route running. Nicky Delmain at tight end has been, a guy that has 9 receptions. We need someone else to step up here. Shamar Hagens, some of these running backs, they like to get involved occasionally as pass catcher. Overall, though, this is a Duke offense. Like you said, they want to kill clock. They want to have balance. Riley Leonard, I think you're going to want to see him use his legs a good bit in this one, try to offset some of those struggles on the interior. Want to see them get to the edge. Final thoughts on this Duke offense approaching this game, Nick?
I think this is a good offense. Like I said, they do have to kill clock, and that's the big key to success here is can they kill clock and find a way to run the ball and put Notre Dame behind the sticks and behind the time there. I think this is a good offense. Like Riley Leonard is exposing himself and turning into a true talented quarterback who is really getting a lot of draft love, potentially very talented quarterback. This could be a huge coming out party for him, a big win at home against Notre Dame. If he has a good game, could certainly continue to raise his draft stock. I like this Duke offense. They're fun to watch. They have good balance, and they're a pretty solid unit.
Looking at this Notre Dame defense, a unit that we were very excited to see against Ohio State. And they really did their job for the most part. The secondary didn't give up too many big plays. There was a touchdown dropped. I think it was by Egbuka or Fleming, one of those guys. So the Buckeyes left some on the table there. McCord for the Buckeyes, he was able to make plays on third down. They really struggled on third down, Nick, especially underneath on crossing routes. And that's exactly what Duke is going to look to exploit. They have guys who can win in the slot. They have athletes that don't exactly win on the outside with strong hands or, tough catches in close proximity. They like to win underneath, so that's going to be something to watch here is who's going to win that matchup because the Irish, they didn't win that matchup really at all against the Buckeyes. Not very sturdy on third down. And then you look at what their defensive line did. They only had 2 tackles for loss. They were obviously pretty strong against the run, but, forcing negative plays was pretty non-existent. They only gave up 126 rushing. 60 of that came on one run from Travion Henderson. So for the most part, they definitely did their job. I think this is a good unit that's going to probably have a great matchup here. You guys like Joshua Burnham, Riley Mills, look at Howard Cross as well. This is a great defensive line for Notre Dame. What do you think about some of those matchups, Nick? Because the defensive line, they were unable to generate negative plays last week. Underneath, they weren't great despite some pretty good downfield coverage. I think there's certainly some concerns here for both teams that could certainly really dictate this game.
There certainly are some concerns for this interior in this unit. They struggle to get after McCord and make him uncomfortable. McCord had it all the time in the world, it seemed, on certain drives to really find those passes and make those plays. I think the secondary hung in there pretty well against what is a really talented Notre Dame or Ohio State wide receiving core. Some of these guys need to get their numbers up, I think, in my opinion. The sack numbers and the quarterback pressure numbers certainly need to be up. Jean-Baptiste, he had a great game against Ohio State, but he still only has 2 tackles for loss on the season. No sacks. He has 23 total tackles so far this season. He's been sort of that big guy off the edge. He was good in the backfield, but outside of him, they haven't really been able to produce a whole lot in the backfield. Jack Kaiser only has 1 sack this season, 28 total tackles so far for him. I would like to see more out of him. JT Bertrand, I know he missed a game, but now he's back. He has 21 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, no sacks so far. They've struggled to get the sack numbers. I think they need to get after the quarterback and get more sacks. I think they only have 4 or 5 sacks on. I believe they have 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, 5 sacks on the season. So they need to find a way to improve that number, get after the quarterback, make Riley Leonard uncomfortable. The linebacking group's been fantastic, which has been the key here, and the secondary has been solid as well. It's just that front defensive line that is great, but they haven't really been able to get those negative plays, and they've kind of struggled, which was their first test against a really talented offensive line and interior offensive line for Ohio State that I have really liked so far this year.
Yeah, Donovan Heinisch, another guy on the defensive line. They're pretty deep on this unit. The linebackers, like you said, have been elite this year. Probably the best trio in America. Maris Leofau came into the season battling for his spot. He's been good in coverage, really good at stopping the run. He's been a guy that's a playmaker. He's been forcing some fumbles as well. Jack Kaiser, he's been flat out elite for them. JD Bertrand as well. This has just been a phenomenal linebacking core that's tracked well sideline to sideline. And I talked about, them trying to attack the edges with this running game to be successful. The Irish have thrived at getting sideline to sideline, showcasing some great speed. So this is going to be a very tough matchup, very interesting one. Biggest reason why we love watching college football, no doubt. And Benjamin Morrison had a great day, I'd say, against Marvin Harrison in that game. So they're certainly going to not want to attack the boundaries. And I don't think Duke's game plan is to ever do that. So we'll see if the strength of the secondary, which is going to be that press man, which at times was pretty good, I'd say, overall for the Irish, which was one of those key components we talked about last week. I think overall this is a pretty easy game to dissect here for this defensive side of the ball, Nick. At the end of the day, what kind of edge do you think they have?
I think this is a unit that's very good in the secondary and very good at linebacking, so they certainly have an edge. I think Duke's going to try and attack the interior with this solid running back room. It's going to be a battle that comes down to whether or not the Duke offensive line can overpower the Notre Dame defensive line. If they can win that battle, I think Duke can certainly win this game. I think they have a physical offensive line unit that's disappointed at times, that can go against a Notre Dame unit that's not got a lot of sacks, really has struggled to get pressure on the quarterback. If Riley Leonard has time to pass and find his guys in the secondary, I think they'll be able to make some nice advantage here, potentially on some crossing routes like we saw Ohio State take advantage of. A lot of the throws during that last drive, especially, were over the middle, where they were hitting a slant across the middle, the tight end for Ohio State, or a different wide receiver here and there. So I think if they find a way to get that good balance, hit people over the middle, and really target those second safeties and avoid targeting Benjamin Morrison, whoever he is going to be covering, because you don't really want to throw to him, Duke can certainly find success there.
Yeah, you look at the Duke defense now, talented defensive line. They have a tall task in front of them. I like to think about those guards, mainly the entire interior line for Notre Dame, as potentially the weakness for them, even though they can certainly be strong at times. This is another defensive line that's going to be tough here. R.J. Oben, Dwayne Carter have a handful of guys stepping up in terms of depth as well. So this defensive line is certainly being very impressive. Biggest problem here, though, was against Duke or against Clemson. They were getting hammered, especially in that second half, downhill running in the middle of their defense. And this is supposed to be a strength for them, led by Dwayne Carter in the middle. They ended up giving up 213 yards, over 5 yards per carry, a lot of two-back stuff from Clemson. You're not going to see that from the Irish. They're going to look to pound you downhill running. I think that's certainly going to be a disadvantage for Duke, Nick, because they, again, in the second half, they had some good momentum running the ball downhill right at Ohio State. Really good defensive line. The defensive line for Duke is good, but it is not the Buckeyes, Nick. They don't have that same strength or size or even intensity. So where do you think this matchup favors? Do you think that they're going to look like they did against Clemson, or do you think the Blue Devils are going to come out on fire here, slowing down this run game?
I think they have a chance to slow in this run game. I think it is certainly concerning. This is the big battle if you're a Notre Dame fan. Can you find a way to win the battle in the trenches and get this running game? We saw Clemson. They didn't put up a lot of points, but Clemson, especially that second half, was able to eat up a ton of yards on the ground, and it looked like that was going to be their key to get back into the game. Of course, turnovers is what plagued Clemson. Now, I don't think this Notre Dame team is going to make the same turnovers that Clemson made, so I think that is a huge advantage for Notre Dame. They're better with the ball. They have better ball security, and they're able to dominate on the ground. Talented back when he has the running room. That's another battle to watch. Can this talented defensive line group get through this offensive line that's been solid for Notre Dame with these good bookend tackles who are very talented for this Fighting Irish team? I think they have the potential to do so. I think R.J. Oben coming off the left side, there's a great player to have. Anthony Nelson on the right side. Can he get after them and be able to produce some huge tackles? I think both of them have been solid players so far this season. They haven't really quite produced the numbers you want to see out of them. I think that you still need to see more out of both these guys. Oben only has 6 tackles this season, 1.5 tackles for loss for him. And Nelson, his numbers are poor so far this season, 5 total tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss. These guys got to step up and have a big game. I'm looking at the 2 big edge rushers there. Can they be involved early and get after the quarterback?
Yeah, and if the defensive line doesn't take over, I'm concerned about this linebacking core. Trey Freeman was great against Clemson. Him and Dorian Masai, though, since then haven't exactly been the most consistent players. Even though this team has been strong against the run, I'm not really confident these linebackers will be able to control the pace of the defense here against these tougher opponents. One thing that's really went good for Duke, though, is that the secondary has been elite this year, and I think it's certainly a mix of bad competition and them actually being good, because we expected big time growth from this back end this season. They're the only team in college football that has yet to allow a pass of 30 plus yards. That is very impressive. They're not allowing much one bit. And, leads to some of these veterans mixed with transfers. Jalen Stinson and Brandon Johnson. Figured Johnson would be great for them, and he's their best player there at nickel. Al Blades Jr. coming over. He was one of those transfers along with Miles Jones. Those guys have been terrific this season. Chandler Rivers has really stepped up, another one of those veterans all around. They like the guys they have penciled in for this secondary, Nick. It's going to be fun to watch them against the Irish, who, again, don't have the most talented receiving core, but that presence Sam Hartman has now brought with play-action passing from this dynamic running game really leads to some intriguing matchups downfield.
Certainly is something to look forward to. This play action could certainly torch this secondary for Duke that has had some struggles, but overall is a solid unit. Chandler Rivers, I expect them to target him. He's a young player, a little inexperienced, who's getting out there. He is their leading tackler, right? 25 total tackles. So he has had a good season, but he's still only a sophomore. They might target him early on. Jalen Stinson as well could potentially be targeted at strong safety. He's also another guy having a good season, 24 total tackles. But what can they do in coverage? I think the secondary has been fantastic, right? But now they're playing against a very talented Sam Hartman at quarterback, who's going to look to try and read this secondary and make a play. But if Duke's going to win this game, it's going to be because they've forced turnovers in the secondary. If Hartman looks uncomfortable and they can make him uncomfortable and throw a pick or two, that could certainly change the field and change the momentum for Duke here. I expect them to have an interception or two, and that's going to be a big reason why they win this game.
Yeah, that 4-2-5, you can get some pressure. There's plenty of guys standing back there ready to make plays on the ball. Looking at the team comparisons, I think the Irish, toe-to-toe, they have the edge in pretty much almost every single category. I'm going to give the wide receiver group here of Moore and Calhoun the slight edge for Duke. But, it's really the Irish probably have more depth anyways. Quarterback and running back pretty easy there, even though no slouch at all. That's a 3-deep room for the Blue Devils themselves. And quarterback Riley Leonard's obviously a star in his own right. Offensive line, defensive line, linebacker. Pretty obvious for the Irish to get the nods there. The defensive line, again, for the Blue Devils is not that bad themselves. They're a pretty good, talented unit. Maybe a bit controversial here, but I gave them the edge in the secondary. I just think these players, the veterans mixed with the transfers, are really gelling well together. Obviously, they haven't really faced the toughest competition, but it's easy to make mental errors regardless of who you're playing and give it up a play that's big. And they haven't did that at all this season, Nick, so I certainly think they're gelling well together, showcasing nice chemistry in the back end, even though the Irish are coming off a pretty strong performance against Ohio State.
I think this is a fair comparison. Riley Leonard is a very good quarterback. He's not quite at that Sam Hartman level in the running back room. You certainly got to give it to Notre Dame here. The secondary, I also think Duke does get the nods. Duke's just been a little bit better in the secondary. I do like this Notre Dame secondary. I think they did a great job against Ohio State, which is a really talented passing attack with Kyle McCord and those talented wide receivers, except for that final drive where they looked a little shaky there, giving up a bunch of big plays to result in losing the game. Overall, I think this tail tape is very fair. I think Notre Dame is the better team on paper, but I think Duke does have some nice energy here.
Yeah, looking at the final thoughts in the prediction, keys to the game for the Irish, get back to that daunting balance and pressure the secondary. Like I just said, they haven't made many mistakes really at all this season. The more you can pressure them, the more likely they are to commit some mistakes. But you got to be able to run the ball to do that. And for Duke, just be sturdy on the interior on both sides and attack the edges with the run game. I think Duke can compete in this one. I love them. I bet them to win over 6.5 games this year, and certainly pretty much lock that up if they win this game. I just think the Irish are too good of a team to lose in this scenario, in this matchup. I certainly think they're going to be able to run the ball with physicality downhill. And then I think Duke, it's going to be tough for them with this offensive line. I think they're going to be able to run the ball well. I think Riley Leonard's going to have a bit of a headache. I think he's a great playmaker, so he's going to put up some points at the end of the day. But they're going to want to have that balance in their own right, and it's going to start with a running game to wants to get to the boundary. And I just don't think they're going to be able to against these speedy linebackers, Nick. So I think it's going to be a tough day overall. You're going with the Blue Devils, though.
I like Duke. A great opportunity. I think Duke's to win this game because their secondary is going to get an interception or two and get them in good field position. I like Riley Leonard to be comfortable and have a positive game. I think they will win the battle in the trenches with this offensive line against what has been a poor at certain situations defensive line for Notre Dame, giving them some nice ground game. They're going to kill a lot of clock. They're going to be able to run the ball. They're going to force Notre Dame into situations to throw the ball where they don't want to and cause Hartman to make a bad interception or two, giving Duke the win. I think Duke has a lot of energy, a lot of fun mojo right now. This is a big opportunity for them to win a big game at home. They already beat Clemson at home this year. They can beat Duke here. They're for real contenders in the ACC and a very fun team under Mike Elko. I like Duke a lot here. I think Duke's got a great opportunity to beat a Notre Dame team that's a little defeated morally after giving up a bad final drive there to lose the game, having 10 players in the field in the final touchdown and some mistakes there, dropping a pick in the red zone there to end the game. I like Duke here. Sorry, I think Duke's going to win this game. I think Notre Dame is going to struggle a little bit. Duke's going to get this big win. It could be a program-changing win.
Duke has also been very opportunistic for a couple of years now when it comes to the fumble recovery, so that's something you also got to take into account. If they can pair that up with a potential interception or two, then certainly if they do force at least 2 turnovers, I definitely think that Duke will win this game. They'll take advantage of those short fields. That's me for today's episode, Nick. I appreciate you joining me. A bit of a game here. It's underrated, but one that could certainly put Duke potentially even in the top 10 here with a victory.
Absolutely, it would be a huge win for the Blue Devils. This campus will be rocking if they can get this win here. This program is certainly in a good spot under Mike Elko. It should be a fun game.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.
That game day was coming.